She walked into school with her head held high. Hours later, she walked out with her hair shaved off by her teacher. No warning, no consent, just clippers, silence, and a cruel decision that would shake the nation. What happened next? No one saw it coming. They say you remember the sound before you understand the pain. It wasn't a scream. Not at first. It wasn't even a word. It was the cold mechanical buzz of electric clippers echoing off the cinder block walls of a middle school nurse's office in Richmond, Virginia. Then came the soft thunk, a piece of hair hitting the tiled floor. Then another, and another. 12-year-old Arielle Brooks sat frozen, her small frame trembling, her breath caught halfway between shock and disbelief. Her legs dangled off the edge of the cot, barely brushing the floor. Her hands clenched the vinyl surface. Her eyes stared straight ahead, wide and wet, refusing to look down at what was being taken from her, what was being erased. Not lice, not gum, not anything medical. Her teacher, Miss Dana Cartwright, was shaving her head without permission, without warning, without mercy, and no one, no nurse, no principal, no adult was stopping it because no one else was there, just Arielle. And the teacher who decided that the way Arielle wore her natural hair was a problem that needed fixing. Let that settle in your chest for a second. Now ask yourself, what would you do if this were your child? If this story makes your heart race, your breath catch, or your hands clench? It should. But don't look away, because what happens next will stay with you long after this video ends. And trust me, you'll want to see the ending. If you believe in stories that expose truth and spark change, please subscribe to this channel to support more content like this. Your one click gives us the power to keep telling the stories others try to silence. Now let me take you back to where it all started. It was an ordinary Wednesday in Richmond. The air was thick with early humidity, and the rising sun cast a golden glare across the brick buildings of James Monroe Middle School. The sidewalks were already warm underfoot, and students, some dragging their feet, some chatting excitedly, streamed in through the front entrance. Among them was Arielle Brooks. Her mother had woken up before dawn to do her hair, something they did together. A quiet ritual. Arielle's thick, beautiful curls had been pulled into a soft puff at the crown of her head, neat and proud. Her mom called it her sun halo. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was hers. And in Arielle's eyes, that meant everything. She was the kind of kid who didn't talk much in class, but always turned in her work on time. The kind who doodled galaxies in the margins of her notebooks, who held the door open even when no one said thank you. Her teachers often described her as polite or respectful, but rarely did they see what lived behind those quiet eyes: a sharp mind, a tender heart, and the deep ache of trying to fit into spaces that never quite made room for her. That morning, she walked into her first two classes without incident. Science had been about photosynthesis. Math had been dull, full of fractions. During both, she kept her head down and stayed out of trouble. But trouble, it seemed, didn't need an invitation. It found her anyway. After third period, as students began packing up for lunch, Arielle heard her name cut through the classroom noise like a scalpel. Arielle, stay behind. Please. She looked up. Miss Cartwright stood at the front of the room, hands folded, expression unreadable. Some kids glanced over their shoulders, curious. A few snickered. Arielle's stomach dropped. She approached slowly. Miss Cartwright leaned in and whispered, but not quietly enough. Your hair, she said, her lips tightening. It's getting a little unruly. It's becoming a distraction. Arielle blinked. I just did it this morning. My mom. I'll help you fix it, Cartwright said, already walking toward the door. Come with me. Arielle hesitated. She looked at the clock. Lunch was next. She was supposed to meet her friends at the table near the vending machines. But Cartwright didn't wait. She held the door open like the matter was already settled. And Ariel followed, because that's what you do when an adult tells you to follow them at school. The nurse's office was empty. Miss Cartwright unlocked it herself. Inside it smelled like rubbing alcohol and stale paper towels. Cabinets lined the walls, stuffed with cotton balls, latex gloves, ice packs, and antiseptic wipes. Tucked into the back corner was a drawer labeled hygiene supplies. Cartwright opened it and pulled out a pair of electric clippers. Ariel's breath caught. She had seen those before on TV at barbershops, but never pointed at her. "Sit," Cartwright said, gesturing to the cot. Ariel didn't move. "Why?" "It's just a little cleanup. Don't make this harder than it has to be," Cartwright replied, plugging in the clippers. Ariel backed up slightly. "Can I call my mom?" "No," Cartwright snapped. "You'll thank me later." Then, the clippers roared to life and the first swipe landed. Ariel gasped. A chunk of her curls fell to the floor. Another swipe. Another chunk. Ariel wanted to scream, but nothing came out. She was too stunned, too small, too full of questions with no answers, and no one to ask them to. The clippers scraped against her scalp with cold indifference. Cartwright didn't trim evenly. She carved out jagged patches like she was pruning a weed, something unwanted, something that didn't belong. When it was over, she clicked the machine off, shook the loose hairs onto the floor, and tossed the clippers back into the drawer like she was done dusting off a desk. "There," she said, wiping her hands. "Much better. Now you won't be a distraction anymore." Ariel sat still, the silence deafening. Her fingers rose slowly, touching the back of her head where smooth skin met awkward raw stubble. Her crown had been stripped, not because she had misbehaved, not because she had broken rules, but because someone didn't like the way she looked, and that someone had decided she had the power to change it. As Ariel stepped into the hallway, the first two kids who passed her did a double take. One whispered, the other snorted. Her eyes burned. She pulled her backpack straps tighter and walked faster, but every step was a betrayal. Every whisper is another cut. Every head turned a reminder that something had been taken from her and no one had asked permission. When she returned to class, the teacher didn't say anything, but the students did. They didn't say it out loud, not directly, but the look said enough. What happened to her? Did she lose a bet? Is she sick? Ariel kept her eyes glued to the desk, her face flushed with heat, her scalp stung, not just from the blade, but from the shame. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She reached into her backpack, hands shaking, and slid her phone out beneath the desk, risking a rule she would normally never break. Her thumbs typed furiously. "Mama, please come get me, please." Something bad happened. She hit send. Across town, inside a secure meeting room at Langley Air Force Base, Colonel Nadia Brooks was in the middle of a briefing when her phone vibrated. She glanced at it, expecting a calendar ping or a memo. What she saw instead stopped her cold. Her daughter's message. No explanation, no emojis, just raw urgency. She stood, didn't ask, didn't wait, didn't apologize, just grabbed her jacket, walked out the door, and hit the road. Because a war had just begun, and her daughter would never fight it alone. If you were in Ariel's shoes sitting in that room as your identity was stripped away, what would you feel most? Ashamed, like maybe it was somehow your fault. B-rage, like something inside you needed to roar. Drop your answer A or B in the comments below. Let's talk about what silence really costs and who has paid it for too long. The drive from Langley Air Force Base to Richmond wasn't long in miles, but to Colonel Nadia Brooks it felt like a mission, crawling through time. Her grip on the steering wheel was white-knuckled, her jaw set so tightly that the muscle in her cheek pulsed with every red light she passed. Her daughter's message kept playing in her mind like a broken alarm. Mama, please come get me. Something bad happened. It wasn't just the words. It was the fear that saturated them. The kind of fear that no 12-year-old should have to carry. Nadia had served across oceans, debriefed foreign agents, and disarmed bombs both metaphorical and real. She had stood before superiors and subordinates alike, with the unshakable resolve of a woman forged in steel, but nothing had ever ignited this kind of fury in her, not even war, because this wasn't just about power or protocol or politics. This was about her child, her baby. Someone had hurt her, and that someone had no idea what kind of storm they had summoned. When she pulled into the parking lot of James Monroe Middle School, she didn't bother with precision. The SUV stopped diagonally across two spaces, the engine still humming as she cut it off with a sharp flick of her wrist. She stepped out and adjusted her uniform jacket. Her full formal Air Force blues were still immaculate from the morning briefing, medals lined her chest like armor, and the polished silver eagles on her shoulders gleamed under the Virginia sun. But Nadia wasn't wearing that uniform for effect. She was wearing it because she wanted them to see, to know, to understand exactly who had walked through their front doors. The front office of James Monroe was sterile and unassuming, with a row of uncomfortable chairs and a plastic welcome banner hanging crooked on the far wall. Behind the glass window, the receptionist looked up startled as Nadia entered. "I'm here for my daughter," Nadia said, her voice controlled but sharp as a blade. "Ariel Brooks. Where is she?" The receptionist blinked hands, fumbling on the keyboard. I I believe she's in class. Is there... She texted me directly," Nadia interrupted. "She's not safe. I need to see her now." The woman hesitated, then picked up the phone, but Nadia didn't wait. She turned eyes scanning the hallway like she was assessing a tactical landscape. The long corridor stretched out before her, lockers lining the walls, the drone of muffled voices drifting from behind closed doors. Her boots echoed with every step, measured, steady, unrelenting. Inside room 214, Ariel sat at her desk, hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't spoken a word since returning from the nurse's office. Around her, whispers had faded into wary silence. Even the kids who usually giggled or made cruel jokes were quiet now, unsure of how to engage with what had happened. And then the intercom crackled to life. "Ariel Brooks, please report to the front office. Your mother is here." All heads turned. A few smirks spread across faces. One boy mouthed, "You're in trouble." But Ariel didn't flinch. She rose, grabbed her bag, and walked out the door. She didn't know what she'd find. All she knew was that something inside her had shattered today, and she needed her mother to help her pick up the pieces. She turned the corner into the hallway and stopped. Colonel Nadia Brooks stood at the far end of the hall like a monument. Her shoulders squared, her stance wide, her face unreadable, but her eyes burned with something unmistakable: purpose, rage, love. Ariel ran. She collided into her mother's arms with all the force of a daughter who had tried to be brave for too long. Nadia knelt, held her tight, and gently placed a hand on her daughter's cheek, brushing the jagged edge of a raw patch that had no right to be there. Nadia didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. Her eyes swept over Ariel's scalp, the uneven tufts, the skin still red in places. The breath she took was sharp and shallow. "Who did this?" she asked, voice low, deadly calm. Ariel's voice came in a whisper. "Miss Cartwright." Nadia nodded once. "Show me." They walked side by side, mother and daughter, soldier and survivor. Down the silent corridor, doors opened a crack. Teachers peeked out. Students held their breath. Everyone felt the pressure shift, as if something ancient and furious had entered their space and dared them to speak. They stopped outside room 213. Ariel hesitated, eyes darting to the door. Nadia didn't. She placed a hand on the handle and pushed. The classroom fell into instant silence. Ms. Dana Cartwright stood, mid-lecture, her marker frozen above the whiteboard. Students sat frozen half-turned toward the intrusion, wide-eyed. But all eyes landed on the woman in uniform. Nadia stepped forward. "You," she said, her voice slicing through the room. Cartwright blinked. My name is Colonel Nadia Brooks," she said. "I am the mother of Ariel Brooks. You remember her, don't you?" Ms. Cartwright's mouth opened, then closed. Her hands began to tremble, the marker tapping against the board. "You took her out of class. You brought her into a room without another adult. You touched her without consent. You shaved her hair," Cartwright stammered. It was unkempt. I didn't mean." "You thought her hair was unprofessional," Nadia said. "You thought you had the authority to define what is acceptable. You violated her body. You humiliated her." Gasps echoed in the classroom. Cartwright tried again. "I thought it would help." "You didn't think?" Nadia snapped, advancing one step. "You acted out of bias. You acted out of arrogance. And you did it because you didn't expect to be held accountable." The room was breathless. Ariel stood by the door watching as her mother dismantled the lie that had buried itself in this space for too long. The lie that silence equals safety, that compliance earns protection, that dignity is conditional. "You owe my daughter an apology," Nadia said. Now Cartwright's face crumpled. Her lips moved, but her voice barely reached. I'm sorry." Ariel didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her mother had said everything, but just as Nadia turned to leave with her daughter, another voice echoed down the hallway. "Colonel Brooks, please, Mr. Landry?" The assistant principal hurried toward them, flanked by two school security officers. His face was flushed, his tie askew. He raised his hands like someone approaching a live wire. "We can handle this internally. There's no need to escalate." Nadia turned to him, expression unreadable. "You should have handled it the moment your teacher assaulted my child." Landry swallowed. Let's step into the conference room. We can discuss this professionally." Ariel clutched her mother's hand, her eyes searching for reassurance. Nadia gave a gentle squeeze, then nodded. Led the way. They followed Landry down the hall. Students peeked through open doors, phones trembling in their hands, unsure if they were witnessing discipline or revolution. Inside the conference room, the air was stale and stiff. Nadia didn't sit. She stood tall, letting every metal on her chest speak before she did. Landry began with apologies, soft phrases, and legal tones. He promised investigations, promised discretion, but Nadia cut through the noise. "This isn't about damage control," she said. "It's about accountability. I want Mrs. Cartwright suspended. I want a public apology issued. I want your conduct code rewritten. And I want every child in this school to know that their culture, their identity, their body is not a distraction." Landry stammered. "We'll consider your requests." "You won't consider," Nadia said. "You will comply, and if you don't," she added, eyes narrowing, "I will file a civil rights lawsuit so loud it'll make the evening news before your next bell rings. I have attorneys already waiting, and I have the media on speed dial." The room fell silent. Ariel watched her mother awestruck, not just as a soldier, but as a shield, as a voice, as the roar she hadn't known she needed. When they finally walked out of the school that day, Ariel didn't hide. Her head was still scarred. Her heart was still shaken, but her hand was in her mother's, and for the first time since it happened, she knew something for certain. She had not been silenced. She had been heard. And this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The next morning, Richmond was already awake with murmurs. What happened at James Monroe Middle School wasn't just a personal matter anymore. It was becoming public faster than anyone had expected. Colonel Nadia Brooks hadn't intended to go viral. She hadn't called reporters or uploaded anything to social media. But the moment she had walked through that classroom door in full Air Force blues and stared down the woman who had violated her daughter, something irreversible had been set into motion. Someone had filmed it. A shaky phone video, less than 40 seconds, had captured just enough the moment Nadia declared who she was, the stunned silence of the room and the words that rang out like a verdict. You touched my child without consent. You humiliated her. By noon, the clip had spread through group chats, Reddit threads, and private Facebook groups faster than school administrators could issue their first statement. And by the time Ariel and her mother sat quietly together in their living room that afternoon, the entire city of Richmond and parts of the country already knew her name, not because of anything she did wrong, but because she'd worn her hair the way it grew from her head, because someone didn't like that, and because her mother didn't let it go unanswered. It was supposed to be just a school matter, a closed-door discussion, a disciplinary form, and maybe some sensitivity training. But what they didn't understand, what they still failed to grasp, was that this was not about one teacher. This was about every child who had ever been told their identity was a disruption. Every black girl who had been sent to the office because her edges weren't tame. Every boy told his lockers made him look unprofessional. Every student who had quietly learned that to be accepted, they must first erase themselves, and now the system that had long moved in silence was scrambling to speak. James Monroe Middle School was the first to react. That morning, Principal Garcia sent out an internal memo urging teachers to remain calm, to defer all media inquiries, and to focus on a message of unity. A second memo followed this, one defensive, rehearsed and steeped in corporate jargon. Then came the district. Their statement landed on the school website like a wet napkin. We take allegations of misconduct seriously. We are currently investigating the incident involving Ms. Dana Cartwright and will take appropriate steps following the outcome. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a passive arrangement of words crafted to buy time, but time was the one thing they no longer had. Because Ariel wasn't the only one. By sunset, 3 other students had come forward with stories of Miss Cartwright policing their appearance. One said the teacher had once commented that her braids looked heavy and must be uncomfortable. Another recalled being told she should consider straightening her hair for picture day. And then there was the boy in 7th grade, quiet, studious, well-liked, who revealed that Cartwright had once suggested his cornrows made him look gang-affiliated. Each testimony added oxygen to the fire. Local activists began organizing. A Facebook event popped up, Town Hall for Student Dignity. James Monroe must be accountable. The NAACP branch in Richmond issued a statement by noon standing in full support of Ariel Brooks and calling for Ms. Cartwright's immediate termination. And at the heart of it all was a girl who had spent the last 24 hours trying to understand why being herself had cost her so much. Ariel stayed home that day. Her scalp was still sore, but that wasn't what kept her from returning to school. It was the way she had felt when she walked down that hallway, every eye watching her, every whisper aimed at her like a dart. Nadia stayed beside her. She didn't push her to talk. She didn't demand resilience. She just made tea, ordered Ariel's favorite lunch plantain, chips, and chicken stew, and sat on the couch with her daughter as the world outside spun faster. That night, as they sat side by side watching the news, Ariel asked, "Why do people care now? Why didn't they care before?" Nadia looked at her daughter, those deep, wondering eyes, the uneven patches of hair still growing back, and said, "Because it was quiet before. Because no one made them look. But now they have to." Then she added softly, and because you are undeniable, but the system was not done. Resisting. The district called Nadia in for a resolution meeting. She arrived without a lawyer yet, but she brought something else presence. Not just the military regalia or sharp poise, but the authority of a mother who had already survived battlefields far more brutal than this one. In the district's sterile conference room, she faced Assistant Superintendent Mallory Grant, Principal Garcia, and two school board representatives. Their tone was polite, overly so. "We want to begin by saying we understand your concern," Ms. Grant began. "It's not concern," Nadia replied calmly. "It's outrage." A brief pause. Ms. Grant cleared her throat. "We understand your daughter's experience was distressing. We're taking steps to ensure it doesn't happen again." Nadia looked each of them in the eye. "My daughter was assaulted by an employee of your school. That is not a distressing experience. That is a violation of civil rights, of bodily autonomy, and of trust." Principal Garcia tried to shift the conversation toward policy clarification. One board member suggested that perhaps Ms. Cartwright believed she was acting in the student's best interest. That's when Nadia leaned forward, her voice dropping low but strong enough to cut through their practiced lines. "She didn't just cut my daughter's hair, she tried to cut her down. And what's worse, you let her." The room fell silent. "I'm not here for lip service," Nadia continued. "I want a formal apology. I want Miss Cartwright suspended immediately without pay. I want new grooming and appearance policies written with cultural awareness at the core. And I want training, real training, not a slideshow for every adult who walks into that school. And if those things don't happen," she said, rising from her seat, "I will go to the Department of Education. I will call in every contact I have in the national press, and I will file suits so large your district won't just pay for damages, it will pay for change." The room had no answers because there was no defense left. By the time Nadia left the building, her phone had buzzed twice, one message from an education reform nonprofit offering support and another from a journalist at the Washington Post. It was no longer a local story. That night, Ariel sat at her desk, sketching quietly in her notebook. Her lines were confident, her hand steady. She had drawn a girl, small hair growing back in tufts, but with a posture that radiated something solid. There was a silhouette behind her, a figure, tall, proud arms open like wings. She titled it, "Fortress Later." She showed it to her mother. Nadia stared at the drawing for a long moment. Then she kissed Ariel's forehead. "You are becoming something fierce," she whispered. The next morning, the district issued a second statement. This one didn't sound like the first. "James Monroe Middle School deeply regrets the actions taken against one of our students, Ms. Dana Cartwright, has been placed on administrative leave pending further disciplinary action. We are reviewing our policies to ensure that student dignity and cultural identity are upheld in every classroom." It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough. But it was motion. And sometimes that's the first victory. As the headlines began shifting from rage to reform, Ariel returned to school. Not because she was healed, but because she had decided that healing didn't require hiding. She wore a soft head wrap green, the color of new beginnings. And when she stepped into the building, people stared again, but not with cruelty, with recognition, because something had changed. The system had scrambled, and a little girl had made the world stand still, just long enough to listen. The photo that changed everything wasn't taken by a professional journalist or a school photographer. It was snapped by a seventh-grade girl named Kayla Jenkins, just a blurry iPhone shot of Ariel Brooks walking into school with her mother, Colonel Nadia Brooks, hand in hand. Ariel's head wrap had slipped slightly, revealing one of the raw patches near her temple. Her eyes were downcast, her lips set in a tight line. The caption was only 3 words. This is wrong. Within 6 hours, it was trending. By the next day, it was everywhere. News anchors across Virginia opened with the story. National outlets picked it up overnight. Mother confronts teacher who shaved black student's hair. Without permission, cable panels debated it. Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag protect black girls at my crown. Ariel Brooks. The image struck a nerve, not because it was the first time something like this had happened, but because for once it hadn't been buried. Because this time, the girl's mother hadn't waited. She had walked in like a thunderclap in uniform, and the story had been too loud to ignore. Interviews poured in. People wanted statements. They wanted outrage. They wanted Ariel on camera. But Nadia said no. She wasn't interested in selling her daughter's trauma for headlines. She had served her country long enough to know how fast media could spin a narrative into something unrecognizable. Instead, she let Ariel decide, and Ariel, still reeling from everything, chose silence, not out of fear, but because silence was finally hers to own. Still, their faces were everywhere. Nadia in her blues, Ariel in her head wrap. The photo became a symbol not just of the violation, but of the strength that followed it. Everywhere they went in Richmond, people recognized them. At the grocery store, a woman touched her chest and whispered, "You did good, Mama." At a red light, a man rolled down his window and said, "Your daughter's brave." "So are you?" Strangers sent letters to their house. Some are handwritten, some typed. Many from people who had no daughters of their own, but saw themselves in Ariel's quiet strength. But the attention also brought something else: pushback. The school board faced pressure from within, the kind that made people nervous. Alumni donors voiced concern. A few local officials tried to downplay the event, calling it a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Cartwright's supporters, few but loud, painted her as a dedicated teacher who had acted with good intentions. One op-ed in a conservative blog asked, "When did discipline become a lawsuit?" And yet no one could explain why discipline had required a pair of clippers and no parental consent. Ariel stayed home most of that week. Her head was healing, but emotionally, she was still walking through a fog. She didn't cry much. She didn't yell. She just floated, as though trying to find the edges of herself again. Until Friday afternoon, when Nadia walked into the living room holding her laptop. "I need to show you something," she said. Ariel sat down beside her on the couch. Nadia clicked play. It was a local broadcast, recorded at the city's emergency school board meeting. They'd moved it from their usual venue to a larger space because so many parents and community leaders had shown up. Camera pans showed a gymnasium packed wall to wall, and then Nadia appeared at the podium. Ariel hadn't known she was going to speak. Nadia's voice was steady, her uniform crisp under the lights. "My daughter's hair is not a disruption," she began. "It's not unprofessional. It's not something to be cleaned up. It's a part of who she is. And what happened at James Monroe Middle School wasn't an accident. It was a reflection of a system that still hasn't learned how to respect the very children it claims to serve." There was silence, then thunderous applause. She continued, "We raise our children to believe they can be anything, but then we send them into institutions where they are punished for being exactly that. The problem is not my daughter's hair. The problem is your lens, and I will not let it distort her future." When the video ended, Ariel sat still for a long time. Then she whispered, "Thank you." Nadia looked at her and smiled gently. "You don't owe anyone your voice," she said, "but you own your story. When you're ready, it'll be waiting for you." Ariel wasn't ready to speak, but she was ready to return. The following Monday, she walked into school again without hiding. Her head wrap was styled with intention, this time a deep maroon fabric lined with gold trim, wrapped high, proud, and deliberate. She moved through the halls with quiet grace, aware of the stares, but unaffected by them. Even the kids who had once laughed behind her back now looked away, not out of pity, out of respect. She wasn't a secret anymore, and neither was what had been done to her. In homeroom, Ms. Zhang, the substitute who had taken over for Cartwright, greeted her gently. "We're glad you're back," she said. "Take your time today." Ariel sat near the window and pulled out her notebook. Not to write, not to draw, just to be. The pages were hers again, and in that moment, she didn't feel broken. She felt becoming. Later that week, Nadia received a call from Councilwoman Raylene Hayes. "We want you to sit on our Educational Equity Task Force," she said. "You've started something we can't afford to ignore." Nadia hesitated. "I didn't come looking for a podium." "But the city's listening," Hayes replied. "We need voices like yours, steady, clear, unafraid," Nadia agreed. Not because she wanted the attention, but because change doesn't come when the cameras show up. It comes when the doors close and policy gets written in fine print. That's where the battle would move next. Meanwhile, back at school, something unexpected happened. Ariel was asked to design a poster for the school's upcoming Diversity and Identity Week. At first she declined. Then she thought about that drawing she had done, Fortress, the one where the small girl stood in the shadow of someone strong. Only now, she knew that shadow hadn't been someone else. It had been her all along. So she said yes, and she created a poster that stopped people in their tracks. It showed a crown, not gold, but made of textured hair, coils and curls, braids and locks all winding into one shape. Around it were words in bold: "I am not a distraction. I am the centerpiece." The poster was printed and pinned across the school. Some kids took selfies with it, others just stood in front of it, quiet. Something was changing, not just in policy, in culture, in the air. 1 week later, the district released a new grooming policy, a document that finally acknowledged implicit bias and the importance of cultural respect and appearance standards. Teachers were now required to attend training on identity awareness and student boundaries. The district brought in external experts, Black women educators, cultural scholars, child psychologists to lead the workshops. It was too late to undo what had happened to Ariel, but it was just in time to protect the kids who came next. And that more than anything made her feel whole again, because the world had seen her scalp, and instead of looking away, it stared back and listened. Healing didn't arrive with fireworks. It didn't walk through the door in applause or camera flashes. It came softly at first through the sound of a door opening at 3 p.m. and a backpack hitting the floor, through the way Ariel Brooks began humming to herself again while unpacking her lunch, through how her eyes, once dulled by shame, slowly rediscovered the light they used to carry. But healing isn't a quiet process. It shakes things. It digs deep. It demands space screams in the middle of the night and breaks you open before it ever begins to sew you back together. For Ariel, it began in her scalp, where hair had once been stolen. Something new began to grow each strand, a reminder that what had been taken could still return, slowly, unevenly, but hers again. Her mother, Colonel Nadia Brooks, had moved from battle mode into something gentler, not softer, but more patient. She still spoke at panels and task force meetings, still showed up in uniform when necessary. But at home, she became something quieter. The woman who ran hot baths for her daughter after long days. The mother who braided what was left of her hair at night, careful not to tug too hard. It had been weeks since the incident. The media cycle had quieted. Ms. Dana Cartwright had formally resigned. James Monroe, Middle school had rewritten parts of its appearance policy and undergone the first of several diversity trainings. The district had made a public commitment to equity and student dignity, but inside their house the story was still unfolding. One morning, as Ariel stood in the bathroom brushing her teeth, she caught her reflection and stared. She no longer wore head wraps every day. That day, her new growth was out short, coiled, unapologetic. She tilted her head and ran her hand over it. It wasn't just hair, it was language. A new alphabet she was learning to read on her own body. At school, things had shifted. Kids didn't whisper anymore. Some smiled. A few tried to start conversations they'd never had before. "You good?" They'd ask casual but sincere. Ms. Zhang, still serving as interim teacher, gave Ariel space when she needed it, and structure when she didn't. Even the assistant principal, Mr. Landry, now greeted her by name as if unsure whether to make up for the past or just respect the present. But Ariel wasn't waiting for apologies anymore. She'd learned something about silence, that it could either suffocate you or become your source of power. And hers had transformed. She began spending more time in the library after school sketching. Drawing helped her organize what words couldn't. Each page in her notebook was a scene, not just memories, but what could have been, what could still be. She drew a black girl with a shaved head, walking into a courtroom made of vines and steel. She drew a teacher with clippers melting in her hands like wax. She drew herself small, but growing like the roots of a tree, pressing up through the cracks of a broken sidewalk. Miss Jennings, the librarian, noticed. She began asking questions, offering books on Black art history, African hair traditions, and symbolism in protests. Ariel devoured them. One afternoon, Ms. Jennings gently asked, "Would you be interested in showcasing some of your art for the student exhibition next month?" Ariel hesitated, then nodded, not because she felt ready, but because she wanted to be. The night before the exhibit, Ariel stayed up late sifting through dozens of her drawings. She chose only 3. The first was titled Reclaim. It was a sketch of her old self, head bowed, curls falling. The second, Armor, a portrait of her mother not in uniform but in a hoodie holding Ariel's hand. The third was her most personal crown fire. It depicted a girl not unlike herself, standing on a rooftop in a storm, hair made of smoke and stars, eyes glowing not with anger, but with clarity. The exhibit was held in the school's multipurpose room, usually reserved for PTA meetings and indoor recess. But that evening it had been transformed. Strings of lights hung across the ceiling. Posters with student names printed in bold fonts lined the walls. Ariel didn't expect anyone to stop at her corner, but they did. Miss Zhang cried quietly in front of Armor 2. Eighth-grade boys lingered in front of Crownfire longer than expected, nodding slightly. Even Principal Garcia, awkward and clearly unsure of how to respond, stood stiffly beside the pieces murmuring, "Remarkable work." But the moment that meant the most came quietly without fanfare. As the exhibit neared its end, a woman Ariel had never seen before approached. She wore a faded church hat and walked with a cane. Her eyes scanned the drawings, then locked with Ariel's. "You made these?" she asked. Ariel nodded. The woman smiled gently. "You know, baby, our hair has always been a battlefield, but you turned yours into a flag." Ariel blinked hard, throat tightening. She nodded again, whispering, "Thank you." And in that instant, she realized something. She hadn't healed in spite of what happened. She had healed through it. Not alone, but not dependent on anyone else's permission to grow either. The weeks that followed brought more invitations. A local museum requested to display her work. A nonprofit offered her a mentorship in art and activism. The school district invited her and Nadia to sit on a student-parent equity panel, but Ariel declined most of them. She didn't need more attention. She needed space to grow, to learn, to be a kid again, one who happened to carry a scar, yes, but who no longer let it define her. Nadia understood. She had spent a lifetime in rooms filled with power and performance, but watching her daughter draw quiet revolution from the solitude of her sketchbook reminded her that not all battles needed boots, some just needed truth. One evening, Nadia brought home a surprise, an old wooden box, weathered but strong. "It belonged to my grandmother," she said. "She kept her journals and sketches in it. I thought maybe it was time. It had a new story." Ariel opened the lid slowly. Inside it smelled of cedar and thyme. She placed her drawings inside one by one, hands deliberate. That night they sat on the porch watching the sky fade from lavender to ink. Fireflies blinked in the yard. "A soft breeze lifted the trees, Mama," Ariel said after a long pause. "Do you think it'll happen again? To someone else?" Nadia didn't answer immediately. She looked out across the dark yard, her fingers curled around a mug of tea. "Probably," she said. "But next time, maybe they won't be alone. Maybe someone will remember what you did. What we did." She looked over at her daughter, "And maybe that'll be enough to stop it before it starts." Ariel nodded, and in that moment she felt it. Not closure, because healing doesn't always come tied in a bow, but peace, and the understanding that sometimes your crown isn't something you wear, it's something you become. Months passed. Ariel's hair grew in full again, thick, rich, and wild with freedom. She wore it differently now, not to blend in, but to declare herself. Her art evolved too, less about pain, more about vision. In the final week of school, her classmates voted her most resilient. She didn't want the attention, but she smiled when they handed her the certificate, because she had earned that word, every syllable of it. On the last day of school, as students rushed out into the parking lot and the summer sun baked the pavement, Ariel paused before stepping into her mother's SUV. She looked back at the building, those beige walls, the rows of lockers, the corridors that had once felt like battlegrounds, and she whispered almost to herself, "You didn't win." Then she opened the door and got in. Nadia didn't ask what she meant. She just reached across the center console, squeezed her daughter's hand, and drove them home. And now to you, the listener, the reader, the witness. Ask yourself this: what do you carry that the world once told you to hide? A, your voice, because it was called too loud, too soft, too much. B, your identity, because it didn't fit the mold someone else designed. Drop your answer in the comments, A or B. This story began with a haircut, but not the kind you get at a salon, not the kind you plan for, or pay for, or look forward to. No, this was something else, something much deeper, more invasive. It was a violation disguised as discipline. It was power wrapped in policy. It was an erasure of identity executed under the hum of clippers in a quiet room where no child should have ever felt unsafe. Ariel Brooks, 12 years old, didn't expect her life to change that Wednesday morning at James Monroe Middle School in Richmond, Virginia. She had done everything right, woke up early, let her mother help style her natural curls, packed her bag, and walked into school. Like every other day, she was a quiet child, observant, thoughtful, the kind who flew just under the radar, never causing trouble, but always feeling the pressure of having to work twice as hard just to be seen as enough. But that day, her hair, her natural, beautiful, culturally rooted hair became the target of someone else's discomfort. Ms. Dana Cartwright, a teacher entrusted with shaping young minds, chose instead to impose her bias. She called Ariel out of class under false pretenses, led her down a hallway past classrooms that echoed with normalcy. Into the nurse's office, closed the door, pulled out a pair of hair clippers, and without permission, without another adult present, she shaved Ariel's head in jagged, careless chunks. She said it was a distraction. What she cut wasn't just hair. She cut confidence. She cut history. She cut trust. But what Mrs. Cartwright didn't know, what the entire school didn't expect, was who would walk through those school doors just a few hours later. Colonel Nadia Brooks' mother, warrior, protector. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She didn't negotiate. She arrived. And when she did, she brought with her not just rage, but clarity. Not just justice, but truth. In full Air Force uniform, she faced the woman who had humiliated her child, called her out in front of the class, and made her apologize, not with words, but with presence, with poise, with undeniable power. And from that moment on, the story became more than a private pain. It became a public reckoning. Someone filmed the confrontation, a short clip that exploded online. Within hours, the photo of Ariel walking beside her mother, head wrap slipping to reveal uneven patches of scalp, circulated across the country. News outlets picked it up. Hashtags trended. Community leaders mobilized. National conversations reignited. Because this wasn't just about one child, or one teacher, or even one school. It was about the pattern of how Black children, especially Black girls, are policed, punished, and pushed into shame for simply showing up as themselves. But Ariel, despite her silence, never became a victim of the narrative. She became the author of a new one. As her hair began to grow back, so did her strength. She spent hours sketching her emotions into powerful images. She refused interviews but spoke through her art. She returned to school not to pretend nothing had happened, but to prove that what happened couldn't define her. She wasn't the girl with the shaved head anymore. She was the girl who turned pain into protest. The girl who took a trauma and drew from it a revolution. Quiet, steady, undeniable. Her artwork was displayed at the school exhibition. 3 pieces, each one a chapter of her story. Students stood in front of them and didn't laugh or whisper. They looked, they listened. Her school's culture began to shift. Staff were trained. Policies changed. The district rewrote guidelines. And while no bureaucratic reform could ever undo what had been done, the seeds of awareness had been planted by a child who had once sat silently at her desk, stinging from shame. Colonel Brooks, too, evolved, from military leader to educational reform advocate, from angry mother to architect of policy. She joined task forces, advised councils, not because she wanted recognition, but because she had realized it should never take a uniform for a child to be heard. Together, mother and daughter became more than a headline. They became a movement. And yet the most beautiful part of their journey wasn't in the courtroom, victories, or the boardroom speeches, or even the online praise. It was in the quiet, in the healing, in the nights. Ariel sat on the porch with her mother, hair newly growing legs pulled to her chest, watching the stars and saying nothing, because sometimes silence isn't absence. Sometimes silence is power reclaimed. Their home, once filled with tension and grief, became a place of rituals, of soft music, of sketchbooks and hot tea, of head massages and laughter, of letting go again and again until what remained was something new, something grounded. Because healing isn't linear, it isn't perfect, it isn't quick, but it is possible. Ariel learned that. So did Nadia. And now, so can we. At its heart, this story is about more than hair. It's about dignity. It's about agency. It's about who gets to decide what's acceptable and who has the courage to say, no more. Ariel's story teaches us that silence isn't always weakness, but when it's imposed, it becomes oppression. It reminds us that identity is not a distraction, that cultural expression, whether through hair, language, clothing, or heritage, is not something to be tolerated. It is something to be celebrated. And that every child, regardless of how quiet or strong, how soft or bold, deserves to be safe in the spaces meant to shape them. It also reminds us of the power of one voice. Nadia could have sent an email, filed a complaint, waited for the process, but she walked in because sometimes the system doesn't move until someone moves it. So what do we do now? We reflect, we speak, we listen, we show up in our homes, in our schools, in our workplaces, at dinner tables and boardrooms. We stand beside those who have been silenced not just by cruelty, but by indifference. We call out injustice even when it's subtle, and we teach our children, especially our daughters, that their crown was never meant to be hidden. It was meant to shine. What about you? Have you ever felt like Ariel? Have you ever been punished or ridiculed for being you? Or maybe you've been like Nadia, forced to speak louder than should be necessary just to be heard. Comment below and share your story. Someone else might need to hear it, and maybe, just maybe, it will give them the courage to speak too. If this story touched you, if it made you feel seen, angry, hopeful, or simply human, please subscribe to our channel. We're working hard to create more content like this. Real stories, deep reflections, and powerful messages that challenge the world to do better. And if you believe stories like Ariel's matter, if you want to help us continue doing this work, consider donating. Every contribution, big or small, helps us keep creating videos with heart depth and purpose, especially in these early stages where every bit of support matters. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling. And thank you for standing tall wherever you are, however you wear your crown. We'll see you in the next story.